Hello, hello, all. Welcome to the Podish-Sortacast, the officially unofficial vodcast of Free Thought Blogs overall. Today we're going to be discussing plagiarism in all of its forms, and we've actually got a nice stacked panel to go with you here. I'm going to do a round of introductions, starting with me since I'm here. My name's H.J. Hornbeck. I am a blogger over on Free Thought Blogs at Reprobate Spreadsheet. With that, I'll go in the order of people who are not muted. So, William Brinkman, mind giving yourself a bit of an intro?
Well, I'm William Brinkman. I'm on Free Thought Blogs at the Bolingbrook Babbler. I'm also a self-published author, and I write the Bolingbrook Babbler series, so I'm definitely interested in the topic of plagiarism.
Excellent. All right, with nobody else unmuted, I'm just going to pick at random. Let's go with Christian Wagner. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. I really should have memorized it after all
I'm
these
very
years.
relaxed about that. But yeah, I'm Christian Wager. I just take the pronunciation. And I'm blogging at ProScience. I work as a computer scientist at non-science part of it, meaning I make big systems, and AI is a big issue right now. How to figure out what we can use and how it can be used. And plagiarism is a very important part of this conversation.
Rock on. All right. With that, I guess we might as well pass it over to. Okay, I'll go PZ Myers. It's American. It should be pronounced American. Let's do it that way for now.
Yeah, I'm bilingual. I can handle it. Yeah, so I'm PZ Myers. I blog at Pharyngula, and I was waffling about showing up here at all because I'm in the middle of getting ready for classes which start next week. So I'm one of those academics, which makes it kind of relevant because what I was just working on was my plagiarism policy and whether we'll use ChatGPT in the classroom. And I was scribbling at that thing. Hey, I ought to show up on this podcast. Maybe I'll have something to say. Maybe you guys will explain it to me so I know what to do.
Oh God, yeah, I ran into that actually during my teaching career as well too, and oh God, it's something that's really going to change how we handle things within the classroom itself. All right, finally with that, let's hand things over to Great American Satan for the last introduction.
Hey, Great American Satan, blog freethoughtblogs.com/gas. Not an academic, not super, don't have much of a pony in this show. Main thing here is to express just the same incredulity everybody else is feeling after the big H Bomber guy video, and that like people would do this is pretty remarkable. And I have a poem to share at the end of the proceedings. Last thing, probably it's a good place to save that for. And I have actually been a defender of AI, so if anybody wants a pro AI side at any point in the proceedings, holler at me.
I'm probably capable of it as well too. It's not my specialty, but I do share a lab with a number of people who do it, who work within AI itself. So I could probably do something similar. All right, well, let's just start with the basics itself. What exactly is plagiarism, and what context are we talking about too? Because it's possible that a word can mean different things in different contexts. So a bunch of us as academics are going to have a different definition than someone who's more on the literary style. So let's just get some ideas for what exactly plagiarism constitutes. Any volunteers?
Well, I mean, in this basic form, it's reusing the work of others without attribution, so to speak, and that's in the basic form. Obviously, there are nuances and in a lot of different ways, but that's for me kind of the core. If you can see, if you use other people's work without attribution, that's plagiarism. And the big question is, when are you using other people's work? That's kind of that's where the question is of because I mean, I don't think there's anybody who's disagreement with my actual kind of definition. I think the problem is just when to define when are you reusing other words. Is that being inspired by? Is that by using the same pattern? Is that copying word for word? I mean, in music, it's a huge problem apparently, because it's basically plagiarism if the jury in a trial says it is, and they don't necessarily know what they're dealing with. While in literary cases or articles, it's a little bit easier. You look kind of for a pattern of repeating texts, so that might be a little bit more easy, but still can be complicated.
It might be good to have this like one object example. PZ, do you feel like you'd be okay talking about Free Thought Blogs' own experience with plagiarism that we had a while back?
I have no problem with people talking about it because we responded rather forcefully to it. So I don't feel any shame at all in saying, yeah, we kicked out a few people for plagiarism.
A few. I'd only heard of one.
There was one other who was, well, it was more complicated because there were other issues as well as the plagiarism. But yeah, one who's definitely strongly because they were plagiarizing things rather vigorously.
Cool. And I mean, I do actually have examples myself too. If you'd like to switch over to that, this would be a little presentation I whipped up
Sure.
pretty much
Sure.
just seconds before coming online. If you ever wonder why I'm late, it's usually because of some technical line like that. So there we go. The audience can now see it. So what does this constitute plagiarism or does it not? Sort of a helpful thing to sort of go through. One thing that sort of has come up within the Oeuvre, and probably what sort of inspired us to some extent, is the debate around Christine Gay and as the head of Harvard and all that. Now, I mean, the allegations have been made. She's actually sort of stepped down and all that. But it's some of the stuff that came to light during that actually sort of interesting to go through. So, for instance, at MIT, around the time she was, I think she was still there, yeah. This is sort of what their thing of plagiarism was. It's not simply sort of using, quoting other people's work or sort of using that. It's also sort of claiming it as your own. In this case, they actually say, hey, here's someone sort of using, the middle column is sort of like, okay, here's actually how you would sort of deal with this sort of thing here. Whereas on the right hand side, you can see someone's actually just sort of copy pasted the work in without any quotes. So it's kind of ambiguous who exactly did it come from. Like, are they paraphrasing this original work, or this is actually their own sort of thing as well? This definitely sort of constitutes within MIT itself plagiarism. So with that in mind, where's my mouse cursor? Weird. All right, here's an example right here. You can see this basically just falls directly within the line of what was in that column there. You've literally got a sentence copy pasted from the other one with no real sort of change to what's there. And it is quoted, it is actually set, the source actually is cited, but there's no quotes to sort of indicate this is not the original author's sort of work with that. And sort of saying, hey, exactly, this is, I'm using directly from the other person. I've got another example here, even longer actually, from Klaus Mathwick. And also, what's interesting here too is you can actually see some attempts to actually work around and paraphrase certain things. The first sentence actually isn't quite exactly the same, but it's still got basically the same ideas within it, and they're sort of arranged in roughly the same order itself. This is not sort of the author's original thought. They've just sort of modified things a little bit to sort of make it look like it might have been their thought, which is actually a bit of a red flag for it. If you encounter that sort of thing, it's kind of a sign that some element of plagiarism has happened. Now, surprise, surprise, this actually does not involve Claudine Gay herself. This actually involves another academic by the name of Neri Oxman, who in fact is married to a rich mucky muck called Bill Ackman. He was one of the main sort of drivers behind getting Christine Gay fired himself. This is actually just sort of like a giant sort of hullabaloo on the far right. Essentially, Harvard recently elected their first black president and their first woman president, Claudine Gay, and much to the consternation of a lot of other people who thought, she didn't deserve it necessarily. And they went through all sorts of contortions to actually go through and justify this. at first sort of saying, well, she's pro genocide because she's, because she went before Congress and all that, and actually sort of defended whether or not topic of genocide would be okay within the thing and all that. But that didn't really stick, and the plagiarism ones eventually sort of did. Which meant other people started digging around for some examples from the other peoples within there, and Neri Oxman sort of came up as a consequence of this. And it led to a case where Bill Ackman was sort of saying, hey, Claudine Gay terrible, she's got to resign immediately because he's plagiarism things, and then defending his wife, saying, no, 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 it's totally fine, it's totally legit, don't worry, there's nothing to see here, and all that. Interesting sort of dual standards there. Claudine Gay herself, I do actually have some examples here. These are taken from the Washington Free Beacon. They sort of have a bunch of quotes here. Now, one thing I don't like about them is they seem to be fairly abrupt with where they cut it off. So you can't really sort of include is there any sort of citation within there? And I mean, this is a right-wing publication. I'm kind of meh on it. Nonetheless, it does sort of look like Claudine Gay did very similar things to what this other woman did as well, too. I've got another example right here. This one's maybe a little bit more tenuous, but you can see there are sentences which look very similar to that. And yes, there is some effort to actually add like additional things within there. And some of them are kind of dodgy as well, too. Like the economic and political exclusion, that's a fairly common phrase. To have it sort of repeated twice, yeah, this is starting to get a little bit dodgy here. One final one as well, too. This one I thought was okay as well. But this gives you an idea of what exactly Claudine Gay is sort of accused of. And I've actually heard interesting opinions from within the academic community itself. The Washington Free Beacon actually quotes, a social scientist to say, oh yeah, this is totally plagiarism itself, which actually not a lot of people I've actually listened to actually have denied that. The closest I actually came to was on a podcast just recently, where they basically said, well, all of this stuff was like in methodology, the methodology section and all that, not really sort of plagiarism in that proper sense. A lot of other people, though, who actually have sort of looked at a little bit more on there, like Bill Ackerman, Business Insider, when they were looking at Neri Oxman, actually said, yeah, no, this is basically plagiarism. It's the same basic thing, But you can see this expert here says, yes, it's plagiarism, but it doesn't really have any sort of consequences to it. And that's one thing that's often sort of left out from here is, okay, this is plagiarism. Does it rise to something that we actually have to do something about? And another example right here, in fact, comes from one of the authors that Gay plagiarized from. She actually has been defending Gay herself and saying she did not, deserve the sort of media maelstrom that came at her, because yes, it is technically plagiarism, but it's not actually actionable on that, which sort of gets at questions of just what exactly constitutes and what should we do about. Wagner, you had something you wanted to say?
No, I was actually going to ask Peter, would these examples, would that be in your classes? How would you react to these kind of examples?
Oh, well, it's kind of an unfair comparison because, I'm teaching writing in biology, and biology tends not to use quotes at all, except in maybe epigrams or things like that. And there's a pretty strong bias against any kind of lifting of text from anyone else. But then part of the reason for that is that in the sciences, we're not going to literary sources to get our information, right? We're going to spiders or frogs or fruit flies or something. And so we can steal all the information we want from them, and we're not going to be accused of plagiarism. But if you're in literary works, it's inevitable that you're going to be getting a lot of your ideas out of other texts, and then the boundaries get really blurry, and it's harder to make a hard and fast decision and say, don't use these words because they were in your source.
I think that's a really important distinction you make there, because a lot of the people who are really fast at saying that these things are obvious. I mean, I don't have an opinion one way or another. I'm not qualified to to evaluate if it's plagiarism. But a lot of people who's really harsh to say there's obvious plagiarism already after the first article were people from hard sciences, and I think
Yeah.
it's important to recognize this that plagiarism looks different in different fields, and that what's in one field will be clear lack of attribution or lack of proper attribution in another field is clear plagiarism. So, I mean, it's I think that's a really good example
Yeah.
of the
Actually,
difference.
yeah. So if my students did exactly the same thing that Gay did, I would be chewing them out and making red marks all over their paper and saying, "No, you don't get to do this." But then, yeah, it's the difference in the discipline that if you are in the business of actually analyzing the ideas and the words of other people, you can't avoid it. You're going to have to do some quoting, and then, or at least paraphrasing, and then the problem becomes it's really easy to forget to attribute a particular section to them. Yeah, there was an example several years ago of a famous writer, was it Dolores Godwin, who did this, where she had to confess, yeah, I was taking notes in the library and I was scribbling all this stuff down, because that's what you do in these kinds of disciplines, is you're writing down all the stuff that other people said. And she neglected to clearly mark that, oh, I've just copied down what I read in this book. So she didn't know she had to paraphrase it. And I can sort of understand that. It's a mistake that happens.
Yeah, and different in different disciplines too. Like computer science has a huge problem with this sort of thing because we're sort of like a yappy bunch and we love to share things online. So oftentimes, I'll say to students, okay, I want you to write this sort of thing. Here's a couple of lines that will do it. And they'll actually just sort of go out and look at things like Stack Exchange or something along those lines and, just sort of copy paste the code they see. Sometimes they'll copy paste and rework it to sort of change the variables. Sometimes they'll actually change the code around and fix various issues with it. But I've also seen just literally students copy pasting code in and going, yeah, I'm done, which kind of violates what we want them to do. We want them to sort of understand what they're doing and learn from it, which makes it sort of, so they actually get the knowledge within. Situations where students suddenly start, using libraries, which we've never even discussed in class and, never didn't actually allow on the assignment itself, really sort of suggest, okay, you're getting this from someplace else. This is not really your work. We're pretty sure of that. Unfortunately, because it's so prevalent within computer sciences, it's really difficult to combat. And in fact, a lot of, professors, I think both in the US and even in Canada, kind of have just sort of held their nose and kind of accepted that there's going to be some level of plagiarism that they're not able to get around, just because there's so much of it out there, to sort of to freely copy and paste from. Unfortunately, the topics we want to sort of teach you about are not new things. They've been in the literature for ages, which also means that there's a lot of, people who've done their own implementations. So, yeah, it is a pain to deal with. And definitely you have to worry about, what exactly line you're crossing here. All right, let's turn to these slides themselves. And yeah, actually, one thing which does distinguish Neri Oxman and Claudia Gay. So I think I keep calling Christine Gay for some reason. One thing I've not seen Claudia Gay accused of so far is copying from Wikipedia. Business Insider actually had a follow-up article where they pointed out, yeah, there's actual passages quoted straight from Wikipedia within Oxman's MIT dissertation. I think pretty much, right even at the high school level, you're taught, no, never do that. So it is pretty damning in regards to that. And I mean, obviously not quoted as well, but too, because somebody who would look at your footnotes and go, wait, you're quoting Wikipedia? Would obviously be like, okay, well, something else is up here. Now, another interesting one which came up during this gossip about Claudia Gay is, in fact, Neil Gorsuch. Because it turns out there's some dodgy things that he did which came out actually during when he was trying to be confirmed to the Supreme Court. he actually wrote a book related to the title of it is there, "The Future of Assisted Suicide and Euthanasia," and passages are just sort of lifted straight off of someone else's work. You know, this is actually like an academic work for the Indiana Law Journal and all that. And you can see sentences, not only are sentences copy pasted as well too, but he'll actually recycle some of the same footnotes as well. This sort of came out during publication. This actually sort of came out during proceedings and all that, and views of this were sort of mixed. On the one hand, within the political story, the Campbell Law School said, "Oh yeah, I know this is totally plagiarism." At the same time, one of the people he was copied from said, "No, this is." This isn't plagiarism. It's just very difficult to sort of come up with other words to say what he's trying to say here. Interestingly, that person released the statement through Gorsuch himself, which is a little weird. But all right, this is a little bit different than what we've had before, because this is a book written by Gorsuch. It is not an academic treatise in and of itself. And also, there's the secondary thing of consequences. Is this bad enough that it should deny Gorsuch a seat on the Supreme Court? Or is it bad, but not bad enough to rise to that level? What should the appropriate outcome be? I think now would be a good time to sort of pause and discuss that one for a little bit.
Well, first thing I'd say though is even if it's just a little bit and it's hard to think of a different way to say it, you still provide attribution. That's his cardinal crime right there is he stole that. And if he'd actually cited it and put a footnote or whatever, then what that would do is give credit to the person who came up with that idea, and he's claiming it as his own. That's what I tell my students too is sometimes you're going to have to lift something from an article that just says it succinctly what you need to say, but you don't get to do that without giving a source, without attributing it to the person who actually came up with that.
There are some footnotes on the passage from Gorsuch's book, and we don't get to see what they correspond to. They're actually in some of them are in the exact same places the citation, the footnote numbers on the original source. So it'd be funny if he just copied that part of the attribution and but without actually saying where he's got his stuff from. But anyways.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other part of what I have to teach my students is that the entire idea is you keep this long chain of references. So if somebody reads your work later, they can follow back and see where you got your ideas and where that person got his ideas or her ideas, and just keep going back and get all the way back to Aristotle or something. So you've got to do that.
Yeah, and this is important just to make sure that people are honest too, since quite often, even if you cite it, it doesn't necessarily mean that your summary is accurate. One thing I looked at for a prior blog post and all that was some of the work of Peter Boghossian. And one of his academic works, I actually, tracked back one of his citations, and he's sort of describing what this other author sort of said and all that, cites to it. I'm like, okay, fine. Okay, let's just see what exactly you said. And it turned out it had a completely different meaning in the original authors than what Boghossian actually had painted it as. Didn't find a way to work.
You're saying that Boghossian was misrepresenting other people?
I know.
No.
I know. Just calm down,
Wow.
This may be, a stunning surprise and all that. Although, I should also point out, we're talking this has happened around the era of 2005 or something like that. So, well before, his more recent ones, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's something we're really used to when we look at creationist work, is they often will cite some scientists, some evolutionary biologists, and they completely misrepresent what they're saying and misinterpret it, turn it around backwards. And that's also deplorable. We don't approve of that.
But we don't actually have to look at even bad people, so to speak, to look at that. There's a nice book called The Leprechauns of Software Engineering that's looking at a lot of kind of common knowledge things from computer science or for computer programming, where they're actually looking at that. And he was actually trying to follow people like would say something and then have a bunch of citations for it, and he would actually try to follow back trying to follow back those citations. And it turned out in most cases, those citations never really existed. It was just something that had come over time. So even if people thought they were attributing it to the right people, because they never checked it, and it turned out that it was nonsense.
God, yeah.
So people was like, people were thinking that they were making a scientific claim, and actually it turned out it was usually somebody's opinion somewhere. So, which
Yeah.
of course, I mean,
Not surprising.
well, I mean, if you've been around any computer scientist in the wild for too long, it wouldn't surprise you. The scientific rigor outside the actual hardware field is kind of more focused on actually getting the code done. Let's put it this way.
Well, and even within there, it has huge problems. Like, I remember someone in computer science actually wrote a fake paper generator and used that to generate a fake paper for a conference. They actually got it published and accepted, and they were scheduled to deliver a talk on it, which would have been fascinating, except the people who ran the conference realized, oh shoot, this is what's happened, canceled it out. Well, a couple of years later, another computer scientist wrote a fake paper detector based on what the output of this original fake paper creator was. And they ran it over just a whole bunch of papers, and they found dozens of journals that had published faked papers from this fake paper generator. And of course, because we're talking fairly technical topics and all that, which are very difficult to check, even if you know what you're talking about, it just got published within the computer sciences with, nary a worry. Just wild. All right, we do have more examples here too. This is one actually that Brinkman brought up and wanted to mention as well too, Mark Dawson. Since you're a little bit more aware of who he is, you might as well give us a quick spiel over who Mark Dawson is.
Okay, absolutely. Mark Dawson is a author of the thriller series, the John Milton series. It's kind of like probably like James Bond. I've never really read it. But more importantly, he's also one of the biggest names advocating for self-publishing. He's a hybrid. He's started out as self-publishing and then got signed by printing presses. And in the late last month, someone looked through his public samples on like Amazon of his work, and then they noticed that there was entire sections lifted or lightly rephrased, and this is like someone who just did a couple hours of research. So the implication is there's a heck of a lot more plagiarism in his works, and he's like also part of the 20 books to 50K movement in self-publishing, which is the more books you have, the more money you'll make, because people will have really split up between buyers, and then people can go through your backlist. So initially, if this is correct, which I believe it is, I mean, the plagiarism from what I've seen and what a friend's confirmed with me, it just, first of all, it's a black eye on the self-publishing industry, because he's one of the biggest names, and it's also unfair because to his students, because he offers these expensive classes on self-publishing, and he kind of leaves out the part where I steal other people's work to make all these books so quickly. I think he had like 17 books in like 5 years or something like that. Something insane, personally. Yeah, and then it makes people who are legitimately writing fast look bad as well. Now there's a Paul in their work. So yeah, that's pretty much it. It's like it's still developing, and he's yet to publicly respond as far as I can see. And it's also, one self-published author asked, is Mark Dawson too big to fail? Is he going to get away with this because he's such a big name in the self-publishing industry? So that's where it stands right now.
Yeah, and I did actually do a little bit of looking. It looks like one of his books, I think it was Tarantula, actually was taken down. So on the one hand,
Yeah.
it's kind of telling that, if you really thought there was no issue here, why would you have any reason to sort of take the book down and remove it from publication?
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, Claudine Gay actually went through and tried to correct some of the misattributed stuff you had there that was listed there too. Although in her case, there's very few people who are saying that doesn't constitute plagiarism. The argument is over what should the consequences be. You know, so it is kind of telling that these changes would actually sort of come after the fact.
Yes.
Indeed, and this is another big problem with publishing in general too. Is there's just not a lot of fact checkers. Like Naomi Wolf actually ran into this as well, where she was fact checked live on air about claims within her book, and it turned out actually she had just done a very shoddy bit of research, and even though she was a big name, nobody had actually sort of followed it through to double check it. Just because you published a book doesn't necessarily mean you actually did any fact checking related to it. It just means you published a book. And people sort of tend to assume that if you are going to publish, there is going to be some due diligence done, when not necessarily so.
Yeah, the traditional publishers, even in traditional publishing, there's not as much fact checking as there used to be, just cost cutting measures, and now we're seeing the consequence.
Yeah, exactly. I do have other examples too. This one I brought up as an example from my own sort of archive as well too, since I actually have talked about plagiarism a couple of times. Harriet Hall, if you followed my blog, is mostly famous for a bunch of transphobic posts she did a while ago and all that. Again, sort of a fairly well-known skeptic within the atheist-skeptic community. Was definitely a pioneer. I think she was was she the flight test pilot? I believe. But definitely as a woman within skepticism, holds, fairly high regard as being, someone to look up to and all that. And had a regular publishing gig on science-based medicine and all that. And I, took her to task for a bunch of transphobic stuff she was talking about. And in the process of that, I did some comparisons against the source material and started pointing out, oh, hang on, there's some weird, writing and all that I'm sort of seeing here. Eventually, it kind of accumulated in my last blog post on her. If I can show the examples right here. One of her last major ones on this sort of subject as well was a book review of Abigail Schreier's, where actually she went through, did like a full book review of it, and more or less it sort of endorsed it and said what was there. In my first sort of look at it, I sort of critiqued her for being like, okay, well, hang on a sec, who's making the claims here? Is this you or is this Abigail Schreier? And also pointed out, okay, there's a lot of weird sort of correspondences between the two books, which, it sort of suggests that you're pretty lazy when you're actually writing the review itself. After that blog post went up, I don't know if it was due to me or not, Harriet Hall actually released a revised version of it, where she went through and actually corrected a bunch of things related to that. Interestingly, as far as I could tell, I've been the only person to actually sort of accuse her of anything like plagiarism or even lazy writing in general. So it's kind of weird that she would actually go through and change her thing in order to actually get rid of that. Even though she actually did that, though, she never really did a very good job of it. Like this passage right here is taken from her original article, but her revised version is pretty much sort of the same itself. You can see entire sentences are just sort of copy pasted over from one to the other. All of the bullet points are more or less in strict order for what they are. You would think if you're doing a review, you would actually sort of tighten it up and only cover key points and all that. But she just sort of goes through every single bullet point, copies them in and all that. Yeah, for me, it was a fairly blatant example of copying itself. But of course, this is not an academic work. This is a blog post going up on science-based medicine. Should we hold it necessarily to the same standards that we would an academic post itself? As I sort of put it within the article itself, writers are under heavy pressure to sort of write to deadlines, and there's sort of an unfortunate habit of them to actually just sort of copy paste from press releases and stuff when writing their articles, just simply because they don't have the time to actually go through and do in-depth reporting or anything like that. You could sort of view Hall as a reporter and sort of say that, okay, this is a limited thing, and she's not really presenting this research as her own, even if in the original she wasn't very clear about who was saying what. She had to clear that up after the fact, but, it's still, you can sort of, try and justify it in some ways. I think it's definitely shady. I wouldn't necessarily go as far as plagiarism, but it's kind of angling in that thing, and it kind of casts a pall over the rest of her work as well, too, because she's done multiple book reviews. The only reason nobody actually has gone through and has then the only reason I can think of that other plagiarism things has come up is because nobody's actually gone through and checked. I believe Harriet Hall herself passed away a year or two ago, so there's not a lot of incentive to actually go back and check that, hey, was she actually on the ball when it comes to this? So it would be interesting if someone did.
It's definitely a blow to science-based medicine's reputation. I mean, they're supposed to be the very fact-based, and this is not a good look for them.
Exactly. And yet I haven't seen any
Well,
sort
they
of
pulled out of it.
Yeah, they pulled that article, so that was a plus.
They did
But,
that, and
I think
therefore
another
this came out. They put it because of the contents rather than anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it reveals another thing though that kind of produces lots of plagiarism is I think Harriet Hall was ideologically in agreement with Abigail Schreier. And she's sitting there thinking, oh, this is exactly what I think. So by just putting these same words down there, I'm just telling people what I think. And I think that's a temptation that's really easy to fall for.
And I actually go through
I
a lot
think,
of other. Oh, go ahead.
You see the other end, the other side of coming out the other side of that, the person that was plagiarized from defending the person that had more success with their words, Kuzma defending Gorsuch, was because of ideological agreement. Like, hey, it's okay if you plagiarize me as long as we're, fighting the fight for creepy, force birthing and all that.
Yeah, and this also, colors our own views as well, too. A lot of the defenses from academia of Claudine Gay were sort of colored by the fact that, the right has been attacking academia for decades at this point. In some sense, there is sort of an inbuilt thing such that, well, okay, if the far right is promoting this, it must be wrong or it must be incorrect in some way. And so there's a knee-jerk reaction to sort of defend it in that regard. And certainly it helps that we can actually point to one of the main proponents' wife, engaging in exactly the same things that Claudine Gay did, laughing at that. But nonetheless, there is definitely, when it comes to these subtle things for, okay, is this plagiarism and what should we do about it? Because there can be such areas of gray, it's very easy to have your own biases sort of come in and color things as well. So it's one thing you've really got to watch out for. It'd be very easy to sort of condemn Neil Gorsuch's plagiarism, it's just beyond the pale and he should not get a Supreme Court seat. But I mean, was that really necessary for him to get that Supreme Court seat? Like, if we took away that work, is there still other work that would have justified it and all that? Playing to our own biases can kind of be an issue here.
But that would neglect the fever part of the plagiarism. I mean, the intellectual property that is still property that's still linked. So the question would be, would being a physical theft of a similar activity, would that have kept him from the Supreme Court? I think that's more accurate, because yes, I agree that he might be qualified by his other work without a plagiarism part, but the actual intellectual property theft is something we have to calculate into that calculation, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Yeah, and I'd also argue that there's probably a pattern. If you dug deeper, I bet you'd find more and more examples of this. And then we have to come up with some kind of criterion where we say, oh, you're allowed 3.5 examples of plagiarism in your past work. And no, you're not allowed any. So I just don't find any kind of excuses for that behavior very convincing.
That was the whole reason why this became a blow up recently, was because somebody saw a few examples and was like, well, how many are there, and went looking further. And that led to H-Bomber Guy's like big 4-hour video of finding a bunch more examples. In every case that you looked at, if somebody had just done a few, they did more. So you figure out that there's a grift that you can do, and it becomes a temptation to just keep doing it.
Especially given the quantity that's there too. If this is sort of if you can find one example where they just copy paste from extensively, it's kind of a warning that you're going to find at least minor versions elsewhere too. This is not something which just sort of starts immediately. People start to get a little bit lazy, and then they get a little bit more lazy, and then a little bit more lazy, and all that. So it's not just sort of simply a pattern and all that, but it can actually be sort of spread across time. I guess I'm sort of agreeing
Yeah.
with you in a different way.
Yeah, but I also think there's one thing. I mean, there's also kind of the damage from it, because the bomber guy YouTube video, which I recommend for anybody who hasn't seen it. It's 4 hours you have to spend on it, but it's I think it's well worth it. It's the important part there was also, apart from the plagiarism, was they're always stealing from voices that wasn't actually heard as much. So there was actually taking away the opportunity of somebody to getting the original work out there. So that's even in some ways even worse than when we talk about this obvious plagiarism for academic work and stuff like that. So that's the kind of commercial aspect on top of it. So which I find.
The ideological aspect of that too, like with the people that were getting away with plagiarism, like on YouTube, they were being defended by their fans. Well, of course, anybody's can be defended by their fans, but it was fans coming from an ideological perspective. In the case of the big one on that video, James Somerton, he weaponized people's like trying to defend gay people from homophobic harassment campaigns to try to cover his ass by like having people attack his critics that are pointing out plagiarism. And then like internet historian, the guy with the ripped off the cave article, like his followers are skewed right wing, and they were just I mean, it may be just be like my point of view, but it seems like right wingers do tend to be a little bit more likely to just like wave off any crime whatsoever from theirs. We do that too, but like they seem to be a little bit more quick to hypocrisy in that case.
Yeah, but definitely makes that definitely makes a asymmetric kind of behavior out there. As I said, like, I mean, I'm not going to defend any kind of plagiarism, but I mean, would the Harvard head of Harvard have been kind of scrutinized as much if she wasn't a black woman? I doubt it. so I mean, I think that's a. I'm not sure going to say we should ignore plagiarism. I just think we should make sure that we also acknowledge that there might be other motives involved when people raise it from time to time.
Right.
Exactly.
And I would just add on the authoritarian right, the attitude is rules are for other people. They don't apply to our friends. That's how we keep our enemies down. So something else to keep in mind.
Agreed. Yeah. And I do have one other example too, and one which I deliberately picked to be sort of as borderline as possible. And again, this is sort of pulled from my own thing, so it's a little bit self-serving. But I spotted something interesting while reading Steven Pinker. He obviously writes a bunch of essays and all that, and he published one in Edge magazine a while ago, basically arguing how the second law of thermodynamics justifies poverty, which. Yeah, deplorable. I go through in big detail, sort of pointing out why exactly it's not a big thing. Why he's got it so terribly wrong. But what's interesting is that entire argument was just sort of recycled into Enlightenment Now. I actually went through and I did purchase a copy of Enlightenment Now myself, compared it against the original thing, and large passages are just copy pasted directly from the two essays, from the Edge essay into Enlightenment Now. Enlightenment Now just doesn't really sort of have, like, it's not quite on brand. Enlightenment Now is supposed to be defending the Enlightenment and Enlightenment values and all that, so it's kind of weird that he would sort of go on this discursion for, poverty within it. But you can see that, yeah, a lot of what he wrote was copied on there. And interestingly, I did go through all the footnotes. The Edge essay does not say this is coming from an upcoming book by Steven Pinker. And Enlightenment Now does not actually link back to the Edge essay to say this was originally published there. So this is Steven Pinker copying his own words. but in some sense, he's sort of getting the same paycheck twice. You know, he wrote something for Edge magazine, got a paycheck from that, and then wrote something for Enlightenment Now, and again, sort of got more money from his publisher for that. So he's sort of double dipping in that way, sort of copying.
Well, I don't know. Like, I'm just thinking about how, like, I used to, if you see a stand-up comic that you like and you go watch all of their routines that you can find, track down all the clips, they're going to be using a lot of the same jokes. He's just giving them the old razzle dazzle, what the fans are coming for. His famous bit that did so well over at the other spot. I don't know.
It sort of
Can you
is.
rip off yourself?
Well, that's
Yeah,
that's
but
a good point.
self-plagiarism that's a thorny issue. It's another thing we have to worry about. And people milking their old work over and over again is troubling. At least when I'm telling my students about plagiarism, I don't have to worry about that because they're just students. They haven't published anything yet.
But here, yes, self-plagiarism is kind of a funny issue. But here, there's actually the problem is people paying for what they thought is original work and getting reheated
Yeah.
work. When I go to see a comedian, I don't expect a completely new stand-up routine. But when I buy a book, I do actually expect that the content is not just slightly expanded article. I mean, otherwise, I would expect it to state it clearly. I mean, when I bought your book, Peter, you clearly stated this was based on your blog post. I knew what I was going into. I mean, that's not an issue. That's not a safe book.
Right.
But the other one, you're paying money for what you thought was something original, and then I mean, if I was a big enough fan to actually read everything he had and had bought it, I would be rather disappointed.
Well, yeah. And there's also an argument that, I mean, yes, this is a popular book and all that. He's not writing for an academic audience. Blah blah blah. Steven Pinker, though, is an academic. It's kind of weird that he would use different standards in different locations. Like, why would an academic suddenly relax their standards entirely while writing a book? And one that's sort of intended to be, he's sort of relying on scholarship in some sense, because he does cite other people quite extensively throughout his own work. It's kind of, it raises odd questions about his own, academic integrity when it comes to his own work. Now, again, I have not done any looking into his own, like, academic publishing and all that to sort of find any evidence for it. And the only reason I sort of bring this up here is it's an interesting corner case. Is it weird? Yes. Is it actionable? I mean, within the post itself, I actually quote, academic sources saying, yeah, this self-plagiarism is bad. You should not be doing it. It's an academic integrity issue and all that. But again, we're not in an academic setting here. We're in a public setting here, where he's acting sort of as an opinion writer. Does it count?
Yeah, we've already gone pointed to specific examples where having different standards in different venues is appropriate, like the stand-up comedy versus the like academia, right? I think I mean I haven't actually considered the self-plagiarism. Sounds like, just from what people are hinting at here, that that's a deeper topic than we necessarily have the time to get into. But yeah, different standards in different locations does seem to be correct and appropriate when it comes to how one goes about doing stuff. Like example of and time and culture can be a factor too. So some of the people that are the worst plagiarists in academia, just coincidentally in some of the situations that I'm aware of, were foreign students, and it seems like the pressure to perform academically in Asian countries is well known, and that maybe that leads to people just having sort of a different standard of what would be acceptable there on a interpersonal level, than it comes to the United States, and try stuff that would have been fine in Taiwan, and finding out that as people take it a lot more seriously at colleges here, what was the other cultural context I was thinking of? I lost it.
Well, and even if we don't
Yeah.
necessarily consider other places, in geography, there's also other places in time. This is one thing I actually learned about.
That was the one. I just want to like get this out before I forget it again. Music industry, doing standards, doing other people's songs was like absolutely normal right up until the 70s, when people started doing big legal action on it. Before that, like, it would be commonplace to hear pop stars perform each other's songs, and then it suddenly became, nope, can't do that anymore.
And that's even classical composers too. We're freely stealing from one another's work, and it was they all knew it was happening. They all seemed to be more or less fine with it. I mean, maybe they grumbled sometimes, but it was the standard. Again, there's shifting standards which aren't necessarily just sort of different geographies and all. That's also within time itself, which can actually sort of change
And
on
I
that.
think that the big controversies like we got right now are a really good springing off point for familiarizing the masses with the rules of what should be acceptable. Because I could really easily see myself in an academic context doing mistakes similar to Gay and Coxman, which is like, well, I mean, you put in your footnote, you reference exactly where you're getting this from, and then you just you paraphrase because you're making the exact same point anyways. You're supporting it with the other data that you've included here. So why couldn't I just take what they said here and then slide it around a little bit or whatever? That would be real easy for a person to think was okay. I mean, plagiarism is supposed to be we tend to stick on the without attribution as being the important thing. Well, I did the attribution, so I'm good, right? It's yeah, I mean, it's there's a lot. I can see a lot of the stuff actually being sort of like ignorance of law, as it were. Not really knowing exactly what the standard was. The idea is this is a good moment to refine that and get that information out to everybody so that they can learn to know better, right?
Yeah.
So this literary plagiarism, it's just sampling, right? We're just sampling a riff and running it over and over again.
But
But
the interesting but the interesting thing is, I could say in Denmark, if you do sampling, you can do that, but you have to pay the original artist. There's like you have like you always have Wham's Last Christmas, every Christmas. There's a kind of a similar Danish song that's always playing, and they did a sampling of very small sampling of somebody else's music, and so far they have made no money from that song, even though it's one of the most played one, because they did it without asking before, so they just have to pay every time. So.
Yeah, and there's also an example from dance music as well too. Drum and bass is defined by a very certain riff, which I think it was Comanche is the name of the band that actually created it. It's just like a couple of seconds loop and all that, of sort of a drum hit and all that. But it's basically defined an entire genre. And I doubt every single person who has written, a drum and bass track has, contributed back to the band that they actually sampled from there. So, this is a complicated topic, that's for sure. Yeah, I do have.
We haven't even reached AI, I was going to say.
Oh yeah. Well, we don't necessarily have to. We are sort of coming up on time. I can always sort of save that for another time, And I mean, if we're getting into a good conversation with more than just me chatting away, hey, great, It's a nice demonstration of the issues involved with large language models, but we don't have to cover it, so. What does the group think? Should we go over time and talk large language models, or wrap it up with a nice poll?
I think let's save that for another time. I think that's a huge enough subject in itself.
Yeah.
And I hear the great American sage wants to be defender of using AIs and stuff like that. So.
I get a little torqued enough that I probably just don't even want to be involved in the conversation. Not that I don't think that you guys could be like totally reasonable about it, but I think I'll probably like skip out on the AI one.
Okay.
But yeah, I had some words to say about plagiarism in the form of poetry. So give me for reading off my phone here. Yeah, where'd I go here? Now, I've never personally been accused of plagiarism, right? So you all know that I would never plagiarize, and that you definitely, I mean, you could do an internet search for the words that I'm about to read to you that I have personally composed, and you wouldn't find anything. So there's no point in even trying to do it. So just keep that in mind before you hear the words of my poem here about plagiarism. Don't plagiarize, don't spread lies, don't deflect when criticized. If you're nicked and it's a fair cop, the jig is up and you really must stop. Don't have an original word in your dome, past cemetery gates strewn with writerly bones. Heed the wisdoms that with these words comes, and if you must write prose and poems, The words you use should be your own. Don't plagiarize and take on loan. Thank you.
Bravo, bravo. All right, I suppose with that, it would be a perfect time to wrap up here, especially since Wagner's over in Europe and things are getting late over there. So, Wagner, let's get you to sign off with more information and final thoughts. More information about yourself, social medias, blah, 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 and final thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, I have a much neglected blog, Pro Science, but one of my goals for this year is actually to be a little bit more active. So let's see if it happens. On question of plagiarism, I think it's an important question. It's not only because I mean it's just sheer laziness, but also because it's actually stealing from other people's intellectual property, and I think it's important, and also because and that's something we haven't really gone into, but when you plagiarize somebody else without quality assurance, you might just keep on spreading wrong lies, wrong conclusions, and making it seem more kind of firm because there's more people saying it. So that's a side effect that we haven't really covered.
Cool. All right, PZ. Where exactly can we contact you? You might be a little bit obscure, so I'm not sure if people necessarily know where to find you.
Well, you won't find me on Twitter anymore. So I've left Twitter, but now I'm on Octodon Social for the Mastodon crowd, and I'm on Blue Sky now, and I'm on Threads, and I always use the same name, PZ Myers at whatever the service is. So that makes it at least consistent. But yeah, don't bother looking for me on Twitter. Never going back to that terrible place. But
and final thoughts as well too.
Final thoughts. I have no final thoughts. I would mention though that if we want to talk about large language models, we should probably draft my daughter to join us because she's a researcher in large language models out there in Madison, Wisconsin.
Oh, cool. All right, that's it'd be nice to have another guest on. So, bravo with that. Let's go with actually, yeah, let's go with Brinkman then for second last outro. Third last.
Okay. Basically, I know plagiarism can be complicated, but the bottom line is don't steal someone's work and try to claim it as your own. And we can work out the nuances there. And let's see, on social media, I'm on Threads, TikTok, and Mastodon and Facebook. Just look up Bolingbrook Babbler and you'll find me there. And I also have a urban fantasy book series out called the Bolingbrook Babbler Stories. So check them out. I'm working on the fourth book now.
Nice, bravo. Rock on. All right, Satan, you're up. Give us your final thoughts as well as where to find you.
Okay. I didn't. Anyways, yes. I am Great American Satan, freethoughtblogs.com/great GAS. I'm have not been active recently, pretty busy. Yeah, I'll have more to promote in some other future date. I want to say something that's kind of funny. Stealing people's intellectual property. Should intellectual property even exist? The one critique that you see that we didn't really get into here is that like some people coming from the sort of dirtbag leftist position have actually defended some of the plagiarizers of the point of view that well, intellectual property is property, and in our anarcho-communist future of glory that we're all angling towards here, there will be no intellectual property. So all this fuss is really about nothing. I actually agree with that to an extent, which is that yeah, I think intellectual property lawyers are the scum of the earth, and they're usually serving the interests of mega corporations to basically stifle creativity across in many fields. But yeah, I mean, obviously, taking somebody's in making yourself wealthy off of or even just making a dime using somebody else's work without giving him any kind of credit or compensation is just crap bastardy of its own, and really shouldn't be condoned, should be punished in some way. So I what's right, what's wrong on that front, I don't, from the leftist point of view, I don't know, but clearly what these plagiarists have been doing is no bueno, and that's that.
Cool. All right. I am H.J. Hornbeck. I blog over at Reprobate Spreadsheet. I've actually sort of gotten back into blogging a little bit with a couple of posts recently. My next one that I've got planned anyway is on the atheist community of Austin and Matt Dillahunty and the various things sort of surrounding that. So if you're really into sort of skeptic controversy and all that, this is actually part 3 of 4 in that regard. So yay. A lot of the stuff on LLMs actually was from an old blog post draft I started back in May but never finished, so it may wind up sort of getting on the web eventually. But yeah, as for my final thoughts, I mean, I've been dominating the conversation anyway, so I don't think you need mine in that regard. So with that, I will just basically, send us off. So thank you very much for listening. We'll be back in about a month with even more good things to talk about. And until then, we shall be seeing you later.